Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art and culture, and it's that time. It's the 20,000 subscriber question and answer. The 20K Q&A, where I take some of your questions that you guys ask me on Twitter, and I try to answer them in some way, shape, or form. Keep in mind, once again, this is all free form, it's unscripted, so these responses might be a little bit rough, a little bit off the cuff, but hey, I'm working on trying to improve that a little bit more. And you guys, some of you might already realize that I hit 20K a couple of days ago, and yet I hadn't posted this video yet. Fun story, I was genuinely terrified that by posting up the Radiohead review, I would lose so many subscribers that it would keep me away from that 20,000 subscriber mark for so long that, hey, it wouldn't just be coming out an accurate date. Thankfully, that's solidified and stabilized a little bit better, so let's see how things pan out over the next couple of days, shall we? And on that note, let's start off with our first question. Mark, what, in your opinion, how has 2016 been so far for music? Honestly, it's been a bit of a weird case, especially when you take a look at the mainstream versus what's actually coming out in terms of albums. In terms of albums, the beginning of this year started off really slow. There weren't any albums that I would consider outright amazing for some time. And then we got a whole bunch of them that came out in rapid succession that were pretty damn excellent, including the one I gave a 10 out of 10 to, the Dave Cobb coordinated compilation, Southern Family. I highly recommend you all check that out. As for the charts, it's been kind of weird. Again, there has been some good songs, but overall it's been kind of a stodgy, kind of monochromatic beginning to start of this year. I expect the summer will lighten up a little bit more, but throughout this particular early part of the year, it seemed like we've been in a state of, I wouldn't say flux, but this sort of miasma. So much of this tropical house, laid-back vibe, but I get the feeling that there's something underneath that's just gonna explode anytime now. If anything, it reminds me a little bit of the very early 90s, where you get some weird off-color hits, and you have a little bit more of that tropical vibe, but there is something that's coming up just very soon that will just blow everything out of the water. I get that feeling coming up in my gut, even if that's kind of completely random. Have there ever been albums this year that you wanted to review, but you didn't get to? See, I actually try to make sure I cover everything on my schedule, but yeah, there have been a few albums that have kind of slipped the net. The biggest one gonna be the most recent Cobalt album, Slow Forever. I actually took a look through Cobalt's entire discography. I was gearing up to this big review, and then I realized that the album took a very sharp genre shift, and it just felt like I was stepping even further outside of my comfort zone. I don't normally talk about a lot of black metal as it is. I'm trying to put more of an effort into it, but even this year, it's been kind of slow. I haven't seen a lot of big black metal projects that have jumped out and really grabbed me. But going beyond that, I was looking for Cobalt to be that project, and then it took some turns towards hardcore and certain types of heavy metal where, honestly, I don't feel I still have that same foundation, so I didn't really feel I could cover in as much detail as I wanted to. The other record was Primal Scream. I was looking forward to doing collaboration with somebody, and so far it hasn't panned out. Hopefully I might revisit it at some point, but honestly, I didn't really find a lot about that Primal Scream album that all that exciting or interesting, so you never know there. What happened to your Head Full of Dreams by Coldplay video review? Copyright claim. Warner Brothers. They've done that a lot. It's gotten to the point where it's gotten really exasperating because there's a whole load of Billboard Breakdown episodes that have been copyright claimed, even though you could make the very fair argument that it is a journalistic show, more than even my typical reviews are. But yeah, they've claimed probably about 15 of them for copyright, and they always do it several weeks to several months after the video already drops. So it's not like I'm going to get any more revenue from those videos anyway. It's just they're scraping up pennies and they're just trying to spite me at this point. It's really kind of exasperating, but Warner is by far the worst culprit, to the point where they've actually blocked the Head Full of Dreams video in all countries, which is, yeah, kind of ridiculous. Yeah, I didn't like the album, because you can tell this is a manual claim too, so you could make the very fair argument that they were stifling free speech or fair use, but at this point, the Coldplay album is mediocre, and I've honestly stopped caring. Would you ever make some of your older reviews on your blog, like your 2012 best and worst list in video form? Yes, I'm actually planning on discussing this a little bit. My plan is that over the next course of the 4 years, I'm going to be putting out my top 10 best and worst hit songs list for 2011 and 2012. Which is going to come first? I'm honestly not sure in terms of how I'm going to approach those lists being somewhat retrospective, because those lists will change a little bit based upon my own personal thoughts and preferences, as my own tastes have evolved since 2011 and 2012. They won't have evolved that much, but I got some special opinions coming up, so expect one of those lists at least to drop this year, so stay tuned. You've talked about them on your FFS review, but could you expand your thoughts on the band Sparks? Honestly, kind of complicated. Sparks is one of those groups that that's always been too smart for their own damn good. And they've also been a band that has shifted genres and sounds so often so that there's no real defined critical consensus on them. I also admit that I haven't been as hugely delving into their discography as I have for other bands like Franz Ferdinand when they collaborated for that FFS album, but from what I've heard of Sparks, I tend to like. They tend to be clever rather than more deeply insightful, and that can kind of rub me the wrong way, especially when it comes to that swaggering air of obnoxiousness that can occasionally creep into some of their stuff. I find sometimes their instrumentation get a little too kooky for their own damn good, but again, they're a cult band. I don't ever expect to find stuff of everything that they put out. I don't expect to love all of it. In other words, I do like them, but I wouldn't call them one of my favorites, especially coming out of the 70s or 80s. Do you reckon Harry Styles would have a better solo career musically than Zayn Malik? I'm going to take the controversial opinion here and say, not really, no. The funny thing about Harry Styles is that for a brief snapshot of time when One Direction was really big, you could see Harry Styles as being the big face of the band, the Justin Timberlake of the group, to go off and make that huge killing on his own. The funny thing is that Justin Timberlake, back when he was with NSYNC, he was doing a lot of the writing behind the scenes as well. He actually had a lot of creative input to the direction that the music was going. So when you look at the liner notes for One Direction, you would expect that Harry Styles would have the same, but really it's not like that. Louis and Niall both have significantly more writing credits. Harry Styles, he's got a few, but not to the same extent, which means that if he cuts loose like Zayn does and dropped his own solo career, he might have some based on the image, but I don't see that creative impulse and force that would drive him forward to potentially eclipse Zayn, because Zayn did have that creative impulse. So yeah, if he has a solo career, I honestly don't think it will take off in the same way, partially even because of timing. Zayn got there first, and the guys who come there second might not be as good. He will always be placed in comparison with Zayn, and that probably will not be a good look for him. What is your opinion on the Canadian acts Classified and Down with Webster? Okay, Classified I actually think is a pretty decent rapper. He's a hip-hop artist out of Canada. Heard a bit of his stuff. I think he's pretty good. I don't think he'll ever be one of my favorites. He's not going to make top 5 for me or anything like that. And if he's on the radio up here, I'll listen to what he puts out. He hasn't had a hit in a while, though, which I find is a little bit bizarre, considering that Canadians, thanks to the CRTC, we tend to support more Canadian artists. Granted, when Drake is clogging up everything, even the United States is getting oversaturated with Canadian artists at this point. As for Down with Webster, okay, fun story. In university, there was a guy who lived right across the dorms in the hall with me, and he loved Down with Webster, so I heard a lot of him around that time. Honestly, I've never really been a huge fan. I thought a lot of their material, their initial material had some spark and energy to it, but the rapping has never been good. The bars and quality there has never really been there. They're very much a band of their time in the late 2000s. As it is now, I don't really know what they're doing right now, and honestly, I don't really care to look. They're not a band that has aged well either, especially in their production. I've always wondered, what do you define as country? When you say a country song isn't country, what do you mean? Here's the thing with that. Country music as a whole has been constantly evolved from traditional country to the outlaw scene to pop country to neo-traditional country, even moving on to bro country or the metropolitan scene as some people have branded it. Country as a whole, there's a certain sound that I would expect to hear. For me, it comes grounded in more of the traditional or neo-traditional scene. You've got fiddles, you have some thicker guitar, you have steel guitar, you have that foundational principle towards songwriting, and you're not just going to devolve into a checklist variety. There is more to country, I think, in terms of beyond just the sound. It also comes into the acknowledgement and respect of the heritage and of the songwriting tradition. So that's when I take a look at pop country, you can see some of that. Like, you get a little bit of it in terms of embracing more pop tropes with it. But when I take a look at an act like Sam Hunt and I say this is not pop country, even by that standard, you see it in terms of a lot of the sound. You see it embracing more of a very stiff, mechanical pop sound, and of course is something with country that might be a little bit more organic. At least that's the way I tend to view it. It tends to come down to a musicality and a songwriting point of view. But again, when you start arguing around genre distinctions, you can make the argument that Chris Stapleton isn't country and more instead of stepping towards soul or southern rock. You can make the same argument with Eric Church. You make the argument when it comes to Sturgill Simpson that's not true country, that's more psychedelic rock or soul or blues inspired. Ultimately, the genre conversation ends up circling around itself. For me, when I say something isn't country, oftentimes I'm referring to it when it's trying to appropriate country trends in order to gain that sort of cred or get rid of some of those typical pop constraints so it doesn't have to face pop competition, but in reality shouldn't be considered as country because the musicality or the songwriting isn't there. Kind of talked myself in circles around that, but that's where ultimately how I feel. And ultimately, it's all opinion anyway. What are some of your biggest pet peeves in music that you listen to? Example, the chipmunk voice effect. Okay, a bit of background here. I absolutely can't stand the chipmunk voice effect. I don't know what it is either. It's the high-pitched warble, but it goes beyond that. It's a lot of pitch shifting in general. I'm just not wild about it as an effect. I find it very cheap, and I find it just a cheap way to actually bring in some sort of bombast, especially when they go into lower range. Beyond that, there's a couple of synth tones that I don't really like, and some of the more glassy tones. It comes down to certain guitar textures, comes down to certain more heavy, chunky sides that I find can often lack melody. That's often the reason why I don't cover a lot of thrash. A lot of it just isn't in my typical sonic palette. But oftentimes, it comes down to effects that are trying to force something that should flow more naturally. That's one reason why the pitch shifting bothers me, because a lot of it doesn't fit like it flows. It feels very out of place and obtrusive. But really, in terms of sonic effects, I can typically come to recommend or like anything. It oftentimes comes in the context of the specific song, whether or not it flows together or comes together or works. How does one create music that can be considered so bad it's good? Often, by accident. I think a lot of people who try to force the whole so bad it's good, they oftentimes just end up making bad music. For example, Big Sean with his song Ass. A lot of people say that song is so bad it's good. It's an experiment trying to make the worst song possible. But that's the thing, it comes across as calculated to me. And honestly, it's not that far off from most of modern hip-hop in today's day and age. It's not like it's that much stupider. The idea behind the whole so bad it's good is that it comes from some sort of deranged creative impulse that is so ridiculously misconceived that it ends up circling around and it actually ends up creating something that's so wonked out and weird that it's actually, you kind of have to like it. When some people say it's so bad it's good, it's so catchy, it's so well composed on a melodic level that really actually just might end up turning out to be a good song, but might be a little bit bad by the perspectives of modern society. Like take Ariel Pink for instance. A lot of his stuff would design his production is messy, it's cluttered, his live performances are reportedly terrible. But you take a song like, I don't know, Round and Round, a song that on some specific level, it actually does have some great melodic flow to it. It might not make a lot of sense, it might have a pretty grotesque album cover, but there's actually something to it that is worth going back to. And some people might call that so bad it's good, when in reality, a lot of critics gave that song a ton of critical acclaim. But when you tell it to some people in the mainstream, they might as well consider it so bad it's good. I think a lot of it comes down to perception at the end of the day. Some people might consider something as so bad it's good because it's bad to their ears, but there's something about it that just they can't quite get past. They have so many critical objections to it, and yet it manages to work for them. Other cases, ultimately, like what you like. I don't really try to bother with the whole complaint of so bad it's good. Ultimately, if it's something that is so outrageous and unnatural, there might be something behind the creative spark to it that might make it good in its own right. You just haven't wrapped your head around it yet. Did you ever write something in a review you ended up reconsidering later on? Okay, you do know that I recognize certain commenters, right? In this particular case, I know exactly which review she's referring to. And here's the thing. Have there been reviews that I've gone back to in the past and have wished that I have phrased things better or phrased things in a different light? Yes. Are there reviews that I feel that I was too harsh or came down as too negative in some cases when they actually in reality grew on me later? Yes. And there are cases where I feel that I've overpraised something that actually ended up souring on me a little bit later. Absolutely. In this particular album case, which I'm not going to name, has that album been one of those cases where it's grown on me? No. Really not at all. In terms of the electronica that it's trying to imitate, it just doesn't do it well. And frankly, in terms of a lot of the musical decisions that were made with that album, I find them garish. I find the lyrics severely lacking. And ultimately, despite good intentions, I find it an excruciating listen. Sorry. Have you ever reviewed albums, listened to them again, and grown on them since those listens for a review? As I just said, absolutely. There have been some albums that I've gone back into that I would give, let's say, a 7 out of 10 or even an 8 out of 10 that have ultimately become some of my favorites throughout the course of their respective years. Prime example, that Avantasia record, Ghost Lights. I've actually gone back to that album several times, and really, it's come to be one of my favorite records thus far this year. I still think an 8 is an appropriate review for it. Where I was saying like a light 8 before, it's now graduated to a very strong 8 in that particular regard. That's one reason why I don't go down to the decimal point in my review scores, incidentally. I want to leave myself a little bit of breathing room and wiggle room and space within that particular period. That's something that I'd have a chance to grow on me or shrink on me in one way or the other. How much value opening and closing tracks hold on the final score, and will there be a physical copy of To Kill a Dragon? Okay, you kind of cheated here ramming in 2 questions, but I actually do want to discuss this a little bit. I mentioned in the past that there was a certain ex-girlfriend of mine that she said that in terms of a psychological psychological study, people tend to remember the most. They remember the great points in a specific art experience, and they remember the ending. So in other words, it's not just the great points, it's the points of elevated emotion. In other words, something that's so powerful, so good, or so bad that people tend to remember at that specific point of elevation. Now, for me, that tends to mean that, and I tend to regard this myself, if an album has a really strong conclusion, or one way or another, I'll tend to remember it more, and it'll tend to come a little bit more of a factor than the very opening, because oftentimes openings tends to be an intro anyways. As for the second question, will there ever be a physical copy of To Kill a Dragon? I'd have to ask my publisher, but honestly, probably not. It's sold well. I've been very happy with how well the novel is actually sold, but I can't say that it's sold enough that it makes a physical print run all that feasible, unless I self-funded it myself, and I don't know how that would all work out. You never know. What was it like writing your novel? Easiest part and hardest part? Okay, this ties into the next question, so might as well jump to that now. How long did it take for you to write your novel? The first draft of my novel I wrote in 2 weeks. Not kidding. I wrote that back in like October of 2012. It was actually for a contest that you want to have a manuscript ready, and they would have an opportunity to go through and get that published. I didn't win that contest, probably because the first draft was god-awful and I submitted that. So, in terms of a lot of the writing process, once you wrote it, then it was the matter of going back and doing the editing. And I'll have to admit, most of the editing that took force over 2013 and 2014, that was painful. It's just trying to find the right publisher that was going to be able to willing to work with me, but also being able to get further groundswell and actually trying to find those little places that need to get fixed. Then coming around 2015, when I actually got picked up by the publisher, that editing process, it took several months, but I also found it very much valuable because it was a directed editing process. And my editor worked really well with me. My publisher was really supportive of how they wanted to guide the direction of my book. And oftentimes it allowed me to expand upon things and become better as an author as a result. So yeah, I'd say that the hardest part was probably that middle period where I didn't have that direction and that drive to do more with it. In terms of the easiest part, honestly, it was probably some of the later period edits where you're just being able to polish off the little things. Because my grammar is normally pretty good, so that was just a matter of refining certain pieces and getting that additional creative impulse. It was certainly the most interesting part, at least for me. Are there any sports you like other than basketball? Well, since my Raptors are not doing all too well, I think they're probably going to lose the Cavs in 6. It would be a long shot if they actually went any further than that. But overall, in terms of sports I like, I'm a big baseball fan. In terms of teams I would support, I'll support the Blue Jays because they're in town in downtown Toronto. I'll also support the Detroit Red Wings because it's close to where Tigers. And Cincinnati Reds. And the Cincinnati story is a personal story, but suffice to say, I've always enjoyed watching them, even though I haven't been altogether pleased with how that team has been managed. Moving beyond that, yeah, I like baseball. I'm a bigger fan of track and field because I did a lot of track in high school. So if that's ever on television, or if I'm ever in a situation where I'm watching television and track is on, I'll watch that. It tends to be fairly interesting. Back when I used to compete, I did 400, 800, 1500, and 3000. I was a distance guy, if you can't tell. I remember you saying that you were an avid Pokemon fan back in Gen 1. Are you still a fan of the series? True story. I've actually gone back and rewatched some of the Pokemon anime. Most of it, there were some heartfelt moments there that actually managed to stick the landing for me. I stopped watching after Season 5, after Misty and Brock left. I just didn't have any real interest going on beyond that. So yeah, I watched the anime. In terms of the series itself, I played up to Gen 4. I just have not had time to get in any further. I work full time. I have this YouTube stuff which requires a lot of time. Plus I have to maintain some vestige of a social life. I have to work out and stay healthy. There's been a lot of things on my plate that I've been working on, so I just haven't had the same timing for gaming as I want to. And Pokemon, given that I don't own any sort of handhelds anymore, I would be playing it on an emulator. And most of the emulators that you can find for DS these days, my computer can't quite run at the level that I want to be able to enjoy the game to its fullest. So yeah, I do like Pokemon. I think it's held up remarkably well. And for those people who are going into, what is it, Gen 6, Gen 7? Hope they have a lot of fun with it. So all props to you. What are your thoughts and opinion on Spectrum Face? Okay, this is a fun story here. Spectrum Face is an account on Twitter that is not run by me, that contains screenshots and pictures of me. I am incredibly flattered by it. It is something I never would have expected. I got a fan account. That is so insane to me. But yeah, it always reminds me to never take this all that seriously. You get a bunch of goofy screenshots of me. Those are inevitably going to be providing the fodder for if somebody ever wants to do a react video of all the goofy screenshots that I put out. They will have more than their fair share. It's like the things that there's one guy did 2 YouTube poops of my stuff, and Like, that is so flattering and it's so cool. I don't understand why. I find it a little incomprehensible, but if you find something about my presentation that's particularly mimetic, I'm all for it. Hell, like, I don't particularly think I'm all that funny, so if you can find something to laugh at this, go ahead, have fun. I really do appreciate it. What inspired you to begin critiquing music as a profession? Well, I wouldn't quite say this is a profession per se. For me, it's a hobby that covers beer and wine and whiskey, so I'm always grateful for that. But on some extent, I would like to see this become a profession, but what inspired it? Okay, I was always writing like cursory music reviews back on Facebook back in 2011. I got bored, I wrote Facebook notes. That's a thing. You can't find most of them, thank God. But back in the summer of 2012, I was between university and my first job, so I was bored for most of the summer. So in between wandering around in the wilderness outside my house, I found things just to do. I basically listened to a lot of music, and I figured, you know what? Why not try to channel some of that writing talent and actually try to make something out of it? So that's when I started the Spectrum Pulse blog, and I bought the domains, and I started moving towards that. And then a year later, I converted it to video, and here we are. What is your other job like? My other job, I'm not going to say a lot about it because there's always the opportunity that some of them might actually see this video, but I'm very grateful for the job. It keeps me busy, and it's actually a really good opportunity for my future career if this ever doesn't pan out. So yeah, I'm really happy with it. And for obvious reasons, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but I will say that I work in IT and I do okay. And final question, is Spectrum Pulse a project you've ever considered doing full time? I have considered making this series a possibility for a full-time thing. I consider it all the time because it is the sort of thing that I get a lot of pleasure out of doing. It's a lot of fun for me to be able to get in front of the camera, even if I am a little stiff and awkward at points, to just be able to talk to you guys. And that's why I try to engage it as much as I can in the comment section before it becomes too toxic. And honestly, you guys do a fair job of making sure that it doesn't get toxic. That's one of the things I really like about the channel here, and the one reason I will never turn comments off or even try to censor comments, because I like the fact that you guys have cultivated a good community, and I see a bunch of you come back in comments time and time again, and you build good conversations with each other. Sometimes the debates can get a little heated, but I like to think that at most part on this channel, you guys keep things reasonably civil, and I respect the hell out of that. And would I like to do this full time? I would love to do this full time. But the thing is, I'm also realistic about doing this full time. I'm also in the case where I'm nowhere near the subscriber growth or at the point of the amount of consistent video views where this could support or pay my rent, or pay for food, or pay for anything beyond just being a hobby at this point. Would I like to see it get bigger? Absolutely. If you want to share my channel to all of your friends and family, get them all to subscribe and get them all to watch my videos on a regular basis, I would adore that. But at the same time, I'm also aware of stipulations about how my content's a little bit tricky to absorb at points. I tend to go on at length, and I tend to take some contentious opinions, but I also I'm realistic about the growth of my channel. I'm amazed that we got to 20,000. I honestly will say that because, again, the fact that you guys will consistently come in and watch, be able to actually have some good dialogue here, I'm really thrilled that it's gotten to that point. But if I ever wanted to make this full time, that would have to come when the channel will probably be at least 10 times the size it is now. And I don't see that happening realistically within probably 3 to 5 years. Maybe, if I'm being lucky there. Hell, if I got something go viral, you never know what happens in today's day and age. But when it comes down to that, it also matters that needs to be sustainable. And that's the thing with YouTube. You have ebbs and flows of content. The good thing about the most reviewing content is that people tend to watch you, and they tend to stick around, especially if you're covering something that's current, like music. But at the same time, you never know how YouTube manages to percolate and turn out. One day you get things like music reviews, they become the big in thing to talk about. And then a little while later, they might just completely fade away. You've seen the rise and falls of prank channels and vlog channels and challenges and gaming videos and that sort of thing. Anything can happen here, and I honestly cannot say where this channel is going to end up. One thing I have noticed, and one thing that I want to highlight, is that in a year, less than a year, we've doubled in size. And if we can keep up that pace, that would be thrilling. If I could see this channel reach 40,000 subscribers by next May, middle of next May, that would blow my mind. And I would be thrilled to see that happen. I'm not sure it will. This year, previous year, I had a couple of unexpected scenarios, like the whole Watch Mojo list that they put me on, and that caused the subscriber boost that I would never have expected and still sincerely grateful for. But hey, you never know what'll happen. And the more of you guys keep coming back and watching more, the more that possibility could come that I could do this full time, and that would be a dream come true. So yeah, again, thanks a lot. I'm not going to say I love you guys, but I respect that you guys are able to come back and continue watching my content. And I hope you continue to do so. I'm over 550 reviews in, so as long as there's going to be music, I'll be coming back again to quote, I think it's the Backstreet Boys there. But until then, till next time, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.